very welcome guests. Absolutely lovely to have you all here tonight on this rather hot summer's evening. Hope you're not getting too fed up with this heat. I brought my fan tonight to help me keep cool and also perhaps to help me think about pausing, because that's one of the things I struggle with, is to just suddenly stare at you all without feeling I've got to say anything. And as Hamer so Anne-Marie pointed out earlier on, that we do need to think about our body language and the intonation and all these things. It's not so much the words we use, because in preparing the speech tonight I thought to myself, quite what am I trying to say? I'm pretty much trying to say the same things over and over again, which I've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years as I try and talk to people as an educator, as an art teacher, and as an art psychotherapist. So you don't want to bore people, you want to have rich words to excite people's curiosity and dare I say, be intriguing. So in the course of my life is interesting to me if I can be excited, if I can feel joy and love and connection, and if I can do that using my creativity, all the better. So whether I choose to put something down on paper or on wood, or if I make something out of clay, whatever I do, I want to feel a sense of involvement and intrigue, actually, with quite what I'm going to say. Now, when I went to North Staffordshire Polytechnic for 3 years in the Midlands, at the tender age of 18, we were obviously taught to draw objects. So we see an object over there, we see that vase, we see various tendrils coming out of it and various petals, and the object over there is a positive. So the vase itself is positive and the leaves are positive, but through the gaps you will see something called a negative. And this is very important thinking to employ when we use art materials, because we're trying to think of position, juxtaposition, how one thing sits next to another, and the importance of working that out with a sort of form of measuring, really. So we're training the eye to see things in space. So this is a very, very lovely thing. Now, I was going to start my talk tonight talking about generosity. Generosity of ourselves with each other, generosity towards ourselves, and whether we suddenly do something a bit spontaneous in life. So for example, perhaps I could pose a question. Maybe I could pick up on some in the audience. Maybe Tom, do you ever feel that you want to suddenly, in the spur of the moment, say to somebody, how about going for a coffee now?
All the time.
All the time, yes, to get away from work. And how about you, Giles? Do you ever suddenly think, I want to just get away from that table at work and stop listening to these sad tales of divorced couples and go off and pick up my weights for myself, or just go for a little spin in my motor car?
I'd happily do that, yes.
Yes. And I think it's a joyous thing to do if we can suddenly break off from the everyday. And in fact, I heard the other day that if we can smile 20 times in the course of a day, how much nicer is that? Now, I have very strange humour, and I don't think a lot of people get my humour, sadly, so that's one of the things. I'm always laughing at myself, and if I meet somebody who can laugh with me, I am more than happy, because it means someone is laughing with me, and that is a double sort of wonderful thing. But going back to being excited, when I was at college, in fact before being in Stoke, I was in Plymouth, and we had some excellent tutors there, and I remember people putting various objects on the tables. Over there we've got various jugs and glasses and so forth, so that in itself could be something. But one day this chap came in with a pink pot and a green courgette stuck in this pink pot, and I thought, how ridiculously funny and silly, because it wasn't a sort of a obvious still life, was it? Normally you'd see a lovely silver jug, perhaps with a lovely cherries spilling over the edge of this sort of silver plate or something. But here we had this rather wacky, pink and green object. But to me that was wildly fun and exciting. It's a little bit different. And we were given some oil pastels and some white spirit, and we could pop this pink and green thing down on the paper and smear it with a white spirit and bring a bit of active line into it. And it was a wonderfully, to me, exciting thing. Now, I might be easily pleased, and I think I possibly am. I think I have a very childlike side, which I am rather delighted in sharing with you. And I like to think that when I'm with other people, they also similarly feel a sense of excitement about being childish. So all these things matter enormously. But then I went on to work as an art psychotherapist, having trained at Goldsmiths College, and training with people to work on themselves, to develop their confidence, was extremely important to me, to make people feel happier about themselves, more affirmed, more valued. And we had very strict guidelines as to how we were working. And it was all very nerve-wracking because somebody would come to us in a complete state of despair, not really wanting to use art materials because they sort of thought that you had to be good at art, but it was nothing to do with being good at art. It was all about letting go and, you know, allowing yourself to play with the art materials regardless of being judged, or not worrying about being spontaneous or not, no right way of doing it, and allowing this language to come to the fore where we could both discuss what was going on in the person's life. So we weren't chasing the aesthetic, we weren't looking at an object and trying to work out the negative space or the positive space, or where it was sitting on the table alongside something else, but in fact a very different criteria altogether. So then we were then thinking, with these pieces of art that came out from the sessions, what could be done with them, and whether we'd use them to think through issues going on in a person's life, which was incredibly valuable because subconscious information would come to the fore to discuss, and there's so much more to it than I'm actually explaining, but it was a wonderful thing. And to cut a long story short, I wasn't worried about the aesthetic so much then, but ironically the aesthetic came in even though I wasn't trying to chase it. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And obviously, if one can do a piece of art and end up feeling a little bit like that, I would say that I would be feeling on to something, because I would be feeling nice and relaxed in the way that perhaps a Buddha may feel. But obviously, making art, you don't want to feel like you're really using a map and not knowing which way up it is, or which way forwards or backwards, because there's no right way of doing it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jo.